Ad Astra, meaning to the stars. What do shepherds and carpenters have in common with each of us? Hang on for a minute and you'll know. Take a seat and relax. Keep looking at the picture of the shepherd while you hear yet again of David's mercurial rise from very humble beginnings. Today's first reading comes from the book of 2 Samuel 5, 1-5 and 9-10, NRSV. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Look, we are your bone and flesh. For some time, while Saul was king over us, it was you who led out of Israel and brought it in. The Lord said to you, it is you who shall be the shepherd of my people Israel, you who shall be ruler over Israel." So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. David occupied the stronghold and named it the City of David. David built the city all around from the Milo inwards, and David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. David flourished in the around 1000 before the Common Era. He was the second ruler of the United Kingdom of ancient Israel and Judah. He founded the Judean dynasty and united all of the tribes of Israel under a single monarch. His son Solomon expanded the empire that David built. David is an important figure in Judaism, Christianity, and even in Islam. All the tribes of Israel, right after Ishbosheth's death, anointed king to David to their king, and he ruled over the tribe for many years. After giving words of wisdom and advice to his son Solomon, David died and was buried in Jerusalem, the city of David. As you probably know, David was the youngest son of Jesse, the youngest of his 8 sons, and through the prophecy of Samuel, he went from a shepherd boy, not yet fully grown, to become the king of Israel for almost 8 years. So from very humble beginnings, he is now one of the most renowned of biblical figures, and more importantly, he is a forefather of Jesus. Mark shows us the same story for his famous descendant a millennium later, Jesus. So as I read this story and I tell about it, keep the story of David also in mind. Then on to the gospel reading from Mark 6, 1-13. Where Jesus, known to the small town as a carpenter, the son of Mary, breaks out of his preordained role as a carpenter and speaks out as he becomes more and more aware of his true ministry. Mark 6, 1-13. He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is it not this carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are you not his sisters also here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put out 2 tunics. He said to them, "Wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. They could see his work-worn hands, perhaps perceive wood shavings on his tunic. They had him pegged. I couldn't resist making that pun. They knew exactly where he fit into his family, his small town, and he was supposed to stay there his whole life and hopefully sire a son to take his place in this village, seemingly outside of the passage of time. And of course, the son would also be a carpenter like his grandfather and father. As I was piecing together the threads of this homily in my head, the same day I ran across this poem on a post. Divine Spirit always does that when I write, sending me thoughts, memories, sometimes poems that I have never even knew existed. It's called "We All Live in the Same House" by Melanie DeMore. We all live in the same house. We all live in the same house. Make some good trouble. Keep on moving ahead. Make some good trouble. Don't let anything hold you back. Good trouble. Necessary trouble. Keep going. Good trouble. Necessary trouble. Don't let anything hold you back. This poem reminds me of the Transfiguration, where on the mountain Jesus reveals himself with Moses and Elijah to his three favorite disciples, Peter, James, and John. They were all overwhelmed and ecstatically happy, so much so that they begged Jesus, after his two companions had returned to their heavenly realms, to build tents there and move in forever. Yet tents are like short breaks in an oasis to refresh oneself when it is time to inevitably move on, because the journey is simply not yet over. There are for all of us bigger and bigger adventures to encounter. Then move on again until our earthly journey is over. As I was mulling this, I thought of a couple of people from the last century that changed both their own lives and through their own example, changed the lives of many others as well. Others, perhaps, that still thought they had found the peg hole that they fit in so long. It had been a perfect fit, so would they either want or need to move on? The first one is about to be revealed. The other one that I cut out was when Superman became Superman, was after he became paralyzed, and he kept on moving on, obviously with help from others. The first figure was born in the humble home shown below in Tuscumbia, Alabama in 1880, dying many years later in 1968. Braille had been invented initially by Louis Braille in 1829, so I presume that was one of the lessons Annie helped her to learn. So Helen Keller could read on her own eventually. The little girl was, by all accounts, normal, maybe with a nanny to provide her daily care. Her future was already laid out in her parents' mind, just as David's and Jesus's were. Becoming a debutante, a Southern belle, if you will. Maybe going to a finishing school, then finding a husband, settling into her own home in Tuscumbia and raising a family of her own. And so on, down through the coming generations. Then it all suddenly collapsed when at the age of 19 months, the toddler became both deaf and blind. In a few years, as she grew up, she would have been consigned to a mental institution where her basic needs of food and shelter would be met. But her spirit and fate and Annie Sullivan intervened. Yes, I am talking about Helen Keller. With Annie, she learned through sign language as the words were spelled out of her little hand. Not only to understand, but to actually learn how to speak clearly just by putting her hands on Annie's lips. Helen, with Annie's companionship, went on to higher education. She started at Radcliffe College, the Cambridge School of Weston, Perkins School of the Blind, and finally Harvard University. Here are a few of her achievements. She went on to be one of the founders of the ACLU in 1920, traveling over 40 countries with Annie Sullivan with her, making several trips later to Japan. 4 years later, she joined the American Foundation for the Blind and worked for the foundation over 40 years. This foundation provided her with a global platform to advocate for the needs of people with vision loss. As a result of her travels across the states, state commissions for the blind were created, rehabilitation centers were built, and the education for blind was made accessible. She was also a suffragist, fighting for women's right to vote. She was appointed on a commission to investigate these conditions of the blind. Much of it was traceable to long industrial conditions, often caused by the selfishness and greed of employers. And the social evil contributed its share. She also found that poverty drove women to a life of shame, also called prostitution, that ended in blindness with syphilis. In 1912, Keller joined the Industrial Workers of the World, known as the Wobblies, saying that the parliamentary socialism was sinking in the political bog. She was appointed on a commission to investigate the conditions of the blind. She also was cited as being at the 1912 strike of textile workers in Lawrence, Massachusetts, for instigating her support of socialism. From 1946 to 1957, Keller visited 35 countries. In 1948, she went to New Zealand and visited deaf schools in Christchurch and Auckland. She met the Deaf Society of Canterbury and was made a lifetime member. In addition, she found time to write several books. Some of them are the most well-known: The Story of My Life, The Story of the World I Live in and Optimism, Light and Darkness, and finally, Teacher Annie Sullivan Macy, without whom she would have been consigned to an institution. Here's my favorite picture of Helen in her old age. I like it best because she's smiling, a smile that shines way beyond her blind eyes and deaf ears. And lastly, my daughter Fauna from Kenya, whom I met online in 2019. Then she was living in a hovel in Limuru outside the capital city, Nairobi, along with her two daughters, Marlene, then 12, and Dinah, 5. They were without food, inflation racking the country, with flooding, then COVIDs. She had just wanted to finish her degree in theology, for which she, like me, has a passion. She was a strong feminist, single, a gay activist, and jobless for strikes against her. Yet she graduated at the top of her class and began working on a master's in feminist theology in the philosophy of gender. We hope that she and her daughters can fly to the U.S. this coming year as she plans to get her doctorate at Bright Seminary in Fort Worth. Last week, she presented her paper in Accra, Ghana. She was invited by the Concerned Circle of African Women and Theologians to present her paper at the 6th annual meeting. She would be meeting, just last week, other women theologians from all over Africa. I am so very proud of her. If you read the words on her award, even this esteemed circle of African women theologians knows that she is a rising star. It says it right there in bold print. Next year, I plan to travel to Kenya to be at her ordination as a deacon. Her own star keeps rising, and with a bit of hope, she will come to the U.S. with her two daughters next spring to pursue her doctorate in African womanist theology and the philosophy of gender. She is still traveling to distant stars that she still has to reach. So what about you? The word at the top, Astra, as I said, means to the stars. There's something inside each of us that wants to and needs to still be expressed. We were made not to only be earth-round. We are made of stardust. What are you waiting to see What lies in wait for you if you only reach out? Fauna from the depths of poverty did. Now it is your turn. What is the next step in your journey to find your own star?